Yeah, so on the subject of that comparison between Bolsonaro and Trump, I know our producer Forrest wanted to ask you about some of Bolsonaro's COVID response, which has been like almost uniquely bad. Forrest, do you have that supercut?
Bolsonaro strongly opposes any restrictive measures.
We won't accept measures that force us to stay home. The COVID-19 virus has come to stay, as others have in the past. Watch poverty rise and stop people from working and eating?
E daí? Lamento. Quer que faça o quê? Eu sou Messias, mas não faço milagre. Ninguém pode obrigar ninguém a tomar vacina, doutora Raíssa. Ela é médica.
If you do not want to be treated, you have the right not to be treated. I decide, for example, not to do chemotherapy, and I decide to die. It's my problem. And we in the federal government have already informed that once the vaccines are approved by the Health Regulation Agency, the vaccine will be offered to everyone. But those who don't want to take it do not have to. I will not take it. Some people say I'm setting a bad example. They say I'm an idiot. I've already had the virus. I have antibodies. Why take the vaccine again?
E outra coisa que tem que ficar bem claro aqui, doutora Raíssa.
Marcelo Quiroga making headlines as he becomes the fourth new health minister in Brazil in the past year. The respected cardiologist has recognized the importance of social distancing measures, a different discourse to that of President Bolsonaro.
Então, esse impacto desses óbitos que estão aí, nós conseguiremos reduzir com 2 pontos principais. Primeiro, com políticas de distanciamento social própria, que permita diminuir a circulação do vírus. Segundo, com uma melhora na capacidade assistencial dos nossos serviços hospitalares.
The 55-year-old is replacing Eduardo Pazuello, seen here on the right, an army general who had no prior medical experience. The change comes as Brazil experiences its worst week since the beginning of the pandemic. On Wednesday, more than 90,000 COVID-19 new infections were recorded in 24 hours, a new single-day record.
O que nós estamos vendo agora são pacientes chegando numa velocidade que nós não conseguimos, porque, como a gente sempre soube, o tempo de permanência desses doentes é muito longo. E agora eles ficam nas UTIs e não há vagas para os que chegam.
In Rio, many fear that despite a change in health minister, the government's widely criticized policy will remain the same.
Eu acredito que pode se mudar, mas também é uma questão muito complicada, porque o nosso atual presidente, que é o Jair Bolsonaro, ele tem a visão dele, tem as medidas que ele quer tomar.
The government has also been criticized for its slow vaccine rollout. So far, less than 5% of the country has received a first dose.
And he said the last health minister was a general, which kind of underlines what you were saying earlier about Bolsonaro only appointing pretty much like generals and military personnel to his cabinet.
Yeah, I think I'm so glad you played that, because with Ben asking me about Bolsonaro's future, this is the crucial part. Brazil is like the US and other advanced democracies, and that you cannot be president if you have made complete enemies out of the most powerful factions, which are the military and big business. And so that was one of the reasons why it was so important for Bolsonaro to bring Moro on board, was to assure kind of bourgeois society that he was going to, be upstanding and all that. But the bigger thing that he did, the more important thing that he did, was before the campaign, before the election, he got this guy, Paulo Guedes, who's kind of one of these classical University of Chicago trained economists who believes in privatizing everything and austerity, whose model is Pinochet in Chile, to be his economics guru. And he promised to not only make Guedes his economics minister, but he said, I'm not going to have anything to do with the economy. I don't know anything about it. I'm giving it all to Paulo Guedes is going to run it. And I can't tell you how many kind of educated Brazilians, embarrassed by Bolsonaro and his rhetoric, would say, I'm not voting for Bolsonaro, I'm voting for Paulo Guedes. So the idea, was we can accept Bolsonaro as long as big business is protected. And what has happened is his management and his movement are so demented and so deranged that the country is in such shambles. You know, the variant is the most dangerous variant in Brazil. It's all over Brazil. And therefore, most commercial partners, trading partners, have completely closed their borders to Brazil. So it's destroyed trade. A lot of the like pygmies in Bolsonaro's movement copy the right, the American right. You know, they love Steve Bannon. They, you know, listen to Newsmax and follow like Paul Joseph Watson and Alex Jones and those kind of people. So they're obsessed with like demonizing China. But the problem is China is by far Brazil's most important trading partner. And obviously China could destroy the Brazilian economy without noticing. And so you have Bolsonaro's sons running around like calling it the Chinese virus, thinking that they're like the US. And then China goes to like impose punishment because that's what China does. And then, you know, the business class freaks out. And then the vice president has to come out and say, Bolsonaro's son is an idiot. He doesn't speak for us. But that's what's been going on. And now with the COVID crisis, it's hard to put into words what it has done to this country and still is doing to this country. It's just getting worse. Unlike in the US and other Western countries, they're kind of getting under control with the combination of treatments and vaccines. It's spiraling out of control here more than ever. You know, I almost don't know anybody in the US who hasn't gotten the vaccine by now. I almost don't know anybody in Brazil who has. I think they're up to like down to like 74 years old. And it's very, very slow. And the problem is because of the inequality, you know, if like you're wealthy, you have access to private hospitals, which are like state-of-the-art hospitals, but state-of-the-art hospitals. But if you're poor, even before the pandemic, you did not want to go to a public hospital. It was very common to hear people would go to public hospitals, poor people, which is most of the population. They'd go to the waiting room with a heart attack or a stroke. They wouldn't be seen for like 7 hours and they would just die in the waiting room. That's before the pandemic. Now you have, now you have, you know, almost every city in Brazil at full capacity or in excess. People are dying in ambulances, are dying in waiting rooms from COVID because of Bolsonaro's mismanagement. And so many of the powerful sectors that had been crucial to at least allowing him to win are now abandoning him because they know they can't afford another 4 years of this kind of mismanagement and international pariah status. The question is, again, though, whether violence will be enough to at least cause something other than a peaceful transition of power.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a lot of ways, you know, like something you say at the beginning of the book is that, you know, people call Bolsonaro, you know, the Trump of the tropics, you know, but really he's much worse. And I mean, it's like, you know, I always think about like the thing that Matt Taibbi said, you know, back in January, you know, when some people were talking about, you know, Trump doing a coup, and he said, look, it's not like I think that Trump would morally object to having a coup.
Right.
It's like 2 minutes into planning it out with his generals, he would get bored and like wander into the other room to like watch TV in his bathrobe. You know, whereas like, you know, in Bolsonaro's case, it's like all of the sort of most demented impulses of the worst parts of the Trump movement, like, but much more like serious and intense and, you know, and much less erratic and flaky about it.
And with a real history of like, you know, military coups, unlike us who, you know, we do them everywhere else, but like we don't have a model with that.
Right. Or I think like for me, the way I try to think about it is, why would any sector of US elite society want some kind of radical change to the governing system of the United States? They're doing very, very, very well with it.
Right.
They do soft coups. I mean, if the CIA views somebody as a threat to their power, they will be more than happy to interfere in domestic politics. Wall Street, the same thing. Power centers, the same thing. But it's not like there are substantial sectors of American power petrified of a Joe Biden administration who would be willing to, you know, incur immense upheaval to keep Donald Trump in office. Right. And that was, you know, exactly. I mean, that was, of course, it's not only, you know, do I think that Trump lacks the, you know, the concentration. I'm sure he would love to do a coup, But even if he did have the kind of attention span that he doesn't have, I just don't think he would ever get the support. Who in whose interest would it be for Trump to do that? And, you know, the United States is the most powerful militarized country in history. Look at what they're doing to those 800 boomers who went to the Capitol. They're the full force of the Justice Department and the criminal justice system is crashing down on their heads because U.S. elites don't tolerate threats to the prevailing order, you know, from the left or from the right. And that was why I never thought that was a real threat, not because Trump's above it, not because there aren't people who want it, who follow him, but because the power center in the U.S. wouldn't allow it. And I do have more faith now in the Brazilian institutions than I did, say, 2 years ago when Bolsonaro was elected. But, you know, as Forrest has said, when you have a very recent history of this kind of violence and street violence and, you know, political instability, you can't write it off that something like that could happen. Bolsonaro's basically been preparing his whole life for that moment, unlike Trump, who, you know, thought about it, you know, a month earlier, like, I can't lose. What am I going to do? I'm just going to deny that I lost. This has been Bolsonaro's ideological project for his whole adult life. He's a true believer with a large dose of religious fanaticism mixed into it, which obviously Trump lacks as well, that I think makes him very willing to kind of go the full distance and in order to try.
It's also that I think, I mean, I don't know what you think about this, but the fact that Bolsonaro's party and like the far right movement barely have a hold on power in the sense of like they're a young party. They just got this majority. It seems like it's a much more desperate situation than the Republican Party, who know they can kind of just wait out a Joe Biden presidency. And it's almost like they don't need Trump because like now, you know, people are running as like MAGA candidates right now in the US. Like, I don't need Trump. They just need Trump to say, oh, I approve of this person or I don't approve of this person. Like, they don't need Trump to actually be in office for that.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. You know, people comfort themselves sometimes with the fact that Bolsonaro has lost a lot of support. You know, like if you look at what that movement was like, you know, I was talking about this earlier, when he first got inaugurated, he had a bunch of different center right and right wing factions united behind him, including Sergio Moro. One of the things we didn't mention was, you know, in 2020, in April of 2020, Moro quit the government and on his way out accused Bolsonaro of all kinds of grave crimes, saying that he was corrupt, that he was interfering in police investigations aimed at his children. And then Moro became like the prime enemy of the Bolsonaro movement. Ironically, he replaced me in that spot to the point where Bolsonaristas actually cite my reporting to prove that Moro was corrupt. It's kind of bizarre. But this happened over and over. Like, huge layers have peeled off the Bolsonaro movement, which in a way is good because they have fewer numbers. But that nub that remains is the like most radical and unhinged. And therefore, in some sense, the smaller that movement gets, the more cornered they get, like a corner rat, the more desperate they become, the more extremist they become. And I think you're absolutely right. There's a very good observation that they know that their one chance to hold on to power is now. With Bolsonaro occupying the presidency, they're very unlikely. It was a weird convergence of events. Brazil is not a right-wing country. It was just the right moment at the right time for Bolsonaro to win. It's very unlikely for that to happen again, and they know that. And I don't think they're going to, you know, release their grip on power easily or voluntarily.
What do you think that I guess Haddad losing in 2018, like what do you attribute that to? I guess just not name recognition and the fact that he wasn't Lula, or
yeah, you know, one of the difficulties for the Brazilian left is that Lula was always the unifying figure. Everything revolved around Lula. That's how the left governed. And once they broke up the Workers' Party, really since Dilma's impeachment, the left in Brazil has been completely lost, weak, divided, tons of infighting, unsure of what their political program ought to be. Different parties
sounds familiar. Sounds very familiar.
Exactly. Just standard left-wing behavior. It's kind of like once you took Tito out of Yugoslavia, the whole thing just collapsed. All that unity was gone, and you know the Civil War began. And so, you know, on some level, I think people believe that if Lula runs again, the kind of, you know, it's kind of like they're talking about the way in the U.S. like a kind of pro-democracy front. Like you have Bolsonaro and then just everyone who's not Bolsonaro and everyone's going to unite behind Lula. I think that's a huge pipe dream. There's very deep anti-Lula sentiment and anti-Workers' Party sentiment still. And the fear is that seeing a weakened Bolsonaro and believing that the country doesn't want to go back to Lula, there's going to be a lot of people who are going to who think that this is our moment to run, who are going to go for that center lane. And you can easily see the left fracturing behind multiple candidates and then sending Bolsonaro to the runoff against some hideous center-right, neoliberal or austerity kind of figure.
Yeah, like Brazil Joe Biden or something.
Yeah, like almost like a kind of Joe Biden versus, or like, imagine if you had like Trump versus Jeb Bush, right? Like that would kind of be the choice. So I hope the left gets its act together. I think they will unite behind Lula, but Lula is a much weakened figure compared to what he was in 2010. People saw him go to prison, and a lot of people believe he's guilty of corruption. And he's been out of power for 11 years, 74 years old. So whether he shows a lot of energy in these recent interviews. You're like, wow, that's like the Lula from, 2005. But it's so many. Brazilian politics is so complicated that you really are dumb to bet on anything more than 48 hours ahead.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, the fact that he has that Lula does have some kind of fighting chance now to regain the presidency, is to a remarkable extent due to your reporting, and it's the book describing it is riveting. So people should check that out. And thank you so much, Glenn.
Yeah, guys, thanks so much. Really appreciate you taking so much time to talk about a country that deserves a lot more attention than it gets. So I really appreciate it.